Next, I would like to call to the stand Beverly Sky.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for printing my little piece about climate crisis, which none of us can escape from right now. So I was a fellow at a place called the Andrews Experimental Forest in Central Oregon last fall, and artists are invited for a period of time to the Andrews Forest to experience what an old growth forest is. There are only 3 remaining old growth forests in the United States and very few left in the world. And so this is a very precious treasure that the Andrews Experimental Forest is trying to preserve. And they call it the experimental forest because there's a portion of this forest that are all hooked up with wires so that the scientists who study and work there can calibrate what's going on with the trees or the tree roots. They're talking to each other, as we all know now. The leaves, what happens in the various canopies. Some of these trees are 100 feet tall. Many of them are over 500 years old. They were born before Jesus. So this is a very precious treasure for our planet. And this was what happened when I got there. I am a visual artist. In preparation for my residency at the Spring Creek project, I purchased extra large tubes of yellow and blue watercolor pigments, anticipating creating several notebooks full of green in the shape of forests. My large checked bag was filled with all my supplies and weighed exactly 49 pounds. The carry-on held everything else. Driving from Eugene to Finrock in the late afternoon, in September, I was surprised to see just a few triangles of evergreen trees interspersed among all the leafless trees for miles and miles. I thought to myself, oh, it's early winter here, and the trees have already lost their leaves, like Vermont in winter. It was not until a few days later that I learned about the holiday and fire that swept through here in 2020. All these gray trees were dead, only they didn't know it yet. Snags, they called them. They would be downed within the next 5 years from a powerful rain or wind event. I was profoundly moved by what now appeared to be a wasteland. This is no longer climate change or global warming. This is climate crisis. I unpacked and settled in at the Barry Lopez house where we were staying. Out the window, I watched the Mackenzie River flowing and glittering on its way west and thought about what it was that I was looking at for a whole day. On our first tour of the Andrews Experimental Forest, what a relief it was to be in a sea of green. Fred Swanson, our guide, asked us what our impressions were, and I said, we are in a museum of time here, a living museum of history that shows us what has happened here for over 500 years. The surrounding treeless mountains have to start all over again. Will 5 generations from now be able to have this luxurious, lush life experience? What a precious resource these ancients are for humanity's future. These woods have so much to teach us, and we are only now beginning to really listen to them. They hold our history in their rings. Instead of painting the bucolic and majestic arboreal evergreens, I wound up watching videos of the fire, searing interviews with the survivors and rescuers, heartbreaking stories of 3 a.m. knocks on doors with 3 minutes to grab your car, your cat, and get out. Cell phones were dead because the towers had melted. One road out of Finrock, the roar and heat of the inferno blazing the mountains and bellowing 50-mile-an-hour winds rushing through the entire valley. Incredibly, nobody died except the forest all around the Andrews Experimental Forest. The towns of Blue River and Vida were incinerated. Here and there, for some inexplicable fate, a house was spared. The Lopez house survived. All that remained of Barry Lopez's nearby studio, Barry Lopez is a well-known environmental writer, an archive of his life's work were white ash. Adding to this was the silence. No birds singing, no longer silent spring. We have entered the silent summer, fall, and winter. I never saw a deer or any other animal other than a small chipmunk and one lonely hawk. My friend Ellen saw a quail that apparently lives under the house with her little brood. That must be how she survived under the house. The Oregon Wildfire and Fisheries organized a tour for us to see the special artificially created Chinook salmon spawning ground on the upper Mackenzie River. We watched from the banks as a few females shimmied the gravel to make their redds, their nests. Chinook salmon travel up from the salty ocean, fasting in the fresh water as they plow their way 100 miles upriver. A journey that began when they left this river to swim the circumference of the Pacific Ocean and return again 5 years later to their birthplace. This arduous upstream swim through several dams begins in February and winds up in Fin Rock annually around September 17th, 18th, or 19th. A few people came around on September 17th to the banks of the Mackenzie opposite the Lopez house to watch for the return of the Chinook. We saw one female. Someone mentioned that 30 years ago, you could almost walk across the river on the backs of the Chinook. We saw one female. So you see, my creative time at the Spring Creek Project in the Andrews Old Growth Forest turned out to be something of a lamentation for what was no longer here. Yes, I try to take heart that the underbrush is back and the fire lily has bloomed, but what was lost will not be found for a long time. I have lots of leftover yellow and blue paint and no more red and orange. Only one of my watercolor books was filled. As a Northeasterner, I am so grateful for this opportunity to experience what is now the new normal here in Oregon and California. Wearing masks outside in Portland, not because of COVID, but because the smoke from the fires is choking and dangerous. It all looks so small and far away when I watch it on the evening news back home. Now I understand it is coming our way too, and sooner than we had anticipated. Our house is on fire. What shall we do?